Elite design, better comfort, more grip. Our new Pure Grip Socks Elite add engineered compression, an anti-blister base, and more grip to keep you locked in. Available now at puregripsocks.com.
They've definitely been the most underrated speed boots of the last 2 years, and there's an argument to be made that they've also been the best. So is it even possible for them to make them any better? To some, maybe. To most, probably not. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to the brand new Mizuno Alpha 2 Japan, the most premium, most expensive made in Japan variation of their full synthetic speed boot, which of course replaces the original Alpha, a boot that looking back was viewed as extremely risky from a brand that really specializes in kangaroo leather uppers, but going full synthetic proved to be something that they were very good at, because the original Alpha, like I mentioned in the intro, is one of the best, most comfortable speed boots perhaps of all time. Which means that the boots that are going to replace them need to be pretty special, especially if they're going to charge $320, making these basically the most expensive non-limited football boots currently on the market. Not a price increase from the original Alpha, but certainly not cheap nonetheless. We're of course in typical Mizuno fashion, and it's pretty clear to see based on how these boots look, the changes that they've made are subtle to say the least, but more significant than I think a lot of people might expect. So in today's video, we're going to talk about how these are different from the original Alphas, what's good, what's not so good, how they fit and feel on feet, whether or not you should consider upgrading from the old ones, and at the end of the day, could they possibly be worth $320? We're gonna answer all those questions in today's review, so if you're interested in learning more, please stick around. And if you are interested in a pair for yourself, you can pick them up below their normal retail price by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes by checking out the first link down below. And as always, if you guys appreciate the unsponsored, brutally honest opinions on this channel, don't forget to drop a like on the video and make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already, so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2025. So first things first, here's a look at Alpha 1 versus Alpha 2 side by side. And as you can see, other than some new graphics and what is admittedly a pretty wild colorway for the launch of the Alpha 2, they really don't look that different from each other. And that's because as a base concept, Mizuno haven't gone and changed all that much, just because they didn't really have to. Where I probably will do a direct comparison video between these two boots down the line. Let me know if that's something you'd like to see down in the comment section, but I can tell you right off the bat, if you already have the original Alpha, I don't really think you should be running out to buy the Alpha 2. Where there are definitely noticeable differences, but I'm not sure that everybody is going to think that those differences are necessarily better. And certainly if you're a little bit more value conscious when it comes to your football boot purchases, if you can find the original Alpha on sale, given that it is now an outgoing model, and you can get them for nearly half the price of the Alpha 2, trust me, the Alpha 1 on sale is going to be the better buy and every bit as good. So with that out of the way, what exactly have they changed? If we start with the upper, you can see it's a very similar concept where it's sandwich layers of very thin materials with a foam-based support cage acting as kind of like a webbing around the entirety of the upper, where you can see very clearly it's highlighted in that solid purple throughout the entire upper, the new pattern for that webbed support cage. The foam itself has been thinned out ever so slightly this time around, and as far as the layers of materials go, mostly thin synthetic kind of plastics, if you will, it's gone from 5 layers in the original Alpha to 6 layers on the new one. So they've actually added a layer, and definitely I would say that this material does feel a smidge thicker than what you had on the original Alpha, but is still plenty pliable and generally feels really nice against your foot for a thinner raw synthetic that doesn't really have much in the way of padding or softness to it. Having said that, I really don't think it's the extra layer of material or the web support cage that is what makes this boot feel different from the original Alpha. It's actually what's happening on the inside, which is a pretty significant change and one of those features that I think you're either going to love or hate. With one of my favorite elements of the original Alpha that carries over into the Alpha 2 being the Zero Glide liner that you have through the heel. You can see it kind of looks like a black mesh material, but it has this really soft kind of sticky silicone texture to it that does a phenomenal job of locking your heel in place and overall just giving the back of this football boot such a solid locked in sensation. The Zero Glide liner also continues along the insole as well, just as it did on the original Alpha. However, if we look at the original Alpha, you can see where the Zero Glide liner starts and stops, with the majority of the upper being lined with this really soft kind of almost felt-like material is the best way that I can describe it. It's very thin, obviously, but it gives the boot a nice soft feel on the inside, which I think is also part of the reason why this boot was so pliable and felt so nice against your foot. It's a material that doesn't have a lot of structure to it, with the underside of the tongue still having kind of a zero grip texturing. It's just in a white color rather than black. Whereas if we take a look inside the Alpha 2, you can see that that Zero Glide liner continues throughout the entirety of the upper, meaning that for, I think, the first time ever, I don't recall any other football boot ever doing this, you have a grippy texture to the inside of the upper across your entire foot. And this Zero Glide material is simply just more structured and less pliable than that of the felt kind of microfiber type material used on the previous generation. The end result being an upper that feels incredibly secure on your feet. It's one of those things that I never would really think to do, because you almost don't think that the upper needs to stick to your foot in this kind of upper area as an example. But once you have all that extra grip lining the inside of the upper with the laces tied tight, these boots just feel incredibly responsive. They are as connected to your feet as any football boot that I think I've ever tried, and the sensation is truly impressive if you're looking for that no shoes at all one-to-one connection to your football boots, which at the end of the day is what I think the speed boot concept is very much about. The downside to this grippy liner is that it just adds more structure to the upper and does add a sense of numbness in terms of touch on the ball when compared to the original. Not to say that the touch is bad, it's still thin, it's very barefoot, it's extremely raw, and you can definitely still feel the ball extremely well if you're looking for that premium barefoot sensation, but it doesn't have that same pliability even once broken in when compared to the OG. With that really being the big change coming from Alpha 1 at the expense of some pliability and arguably a little bit of comfort, perhaps just a more raw feel as well. They've added a little bit of structure, in turn making the upper maybe feel a little bit less impressively pliable, but it's incredibly impressive as it relates to lockdown and responsiveness. So it does depend on what you're looking for. And again, I don't want to exaggerate the responsiveness compared to the original, because that certainly was not an issue with the first Alpha, but certainly if you want the most responsive feel from a pair of speed boots possible, I'm not sure anything has ever been quite as impressive as these are, while still maintaining what is ultimately a very comfortable fit and feel for what is still a very thin, raw, barefoot feeling synthetic upper. With the final note regarding touch on the ball being the finish on the surface of the upper, which is pretty well identical to what was on the original Alpha, where it kind of has this glossy finish to the surface that isn't necessarily grippy, but isn't necessarily slippery either. It's somewhere in the middle, and I think very fitting for this style of speed boot. Not too far off what we used to get from pretty much every Mercurial back in the Teijin synthetic days, and as long as you're not after a ton of extra grip, I don't see why you would have a problem with the way these feel on the ball. We talked a little bit about the comfort as well as the quality of fit and lockdown, and a lot of that can be attributed to this very deep central lacing system that carries over from the original Alpha, where they have opted, like every other Mizuno boot other than the Morelia Neo Betas, the Alpha 2 has a traditional U-throat construction with a standalone tongue, with the underside of that tongue even having that Zero Glide liner to help it stay in place a little bit better. But the lacing system itself zigzags up either side of the foot and just allows for so much adjustability that once you have them loosened up, you can slide your foot in very easily. Maybe not quite as easily on these as the original Alpha, just given how sticky the inside of the boot is against your socks, But once you pull on those laces and secure everything in place, the boots just feel so connected. They have absolutely nailed the shaping. And again, Mizuno is a brand that is known for their overall comfort and quality of fit, predominantly because of the incredibly premium kangaroo leather materials that they use on their Made in Japan product line. But this being full synthetic, not typically the Mizuno way, the quality of the fit has not been sacrificed, where simply put, if you are looking for the best possible fit from a pair of thin synthetic speed boots, this is the gold standard. And just like the original Mizuno Alpha, we're seeing more and more brands doing this now. They give you that extra lace hole at the top that's a little bit further back and a little bit lower, where if you are struggling with a bit of heel lockdown, you can utilize that extra lacing position just to help hold your heel down and back inside of the football boots. Moving to the rear, you're going to find what is another kind of signature Mizuno design element in terms of this elongated opening and low cut construction. We talked about that zero glide liner through the heel, plenty of padding along the back and sides. To me, this is the best heel liner on the market. Nothing even comes close. I really think Mizuno should consider putting this on all of their football boots. It feels that good. The structure is coming from the external heel counter directly connected to the sole plate, but we'll get into that a little bit later in the video. Then the insole, fully removable. I'll give you guys a quick look at that. It again has that zero glide material lining the entire top layer. And then you're gonna find their Mizuno Energy foam for the insole, just like the original. It's supposed to be an extra premium foam, but in reality, it's relatively thin. It definitely doesn't feel cheap, but I wouldn't say that it really separates itself from other insoles in terms of how it feels, other than the incredible amount of extra grip you get from the liner. That definitely helps to hold your foot in place. And while you can't really feel it, at least I didn't, you will notice that they have widened that little back extension piece ever so slightly on the Alpha 2 compared to the original. Moving to the base, everything that you see is the same as the original Alpha. What has changed though is something you can't see, and that's the Carvo insert, where the sole plate itself is still a plastic construction. You can see on this particular colorway, it's mostly dark purple, which does of course include that external heel counter directly attached to the sole plate at the back. Really love that design element, and more or less something that does kind of carry over from the Morelia Neo series. They've been doing it for a long time. And then you can see highlighted in neon yellow, you have a little bit of an insert in the heel as well as in the forefoot, where of course on the Made in Japan variation, you are going to get a Carvo insert in the forefoot, which is a special type of plastic material that they conveniently finish with kind of like a carbon fiber pattern. It isn't in fact carbon fiber. That's there to give you that spring back sensation, that responsive feel that I think that is expected from a lot of speed boots, where the feedback from the original Alpha is that the Carvo insert was a little bit too stiff. So on this new one, they have thinned it out by fractions of a millimeter. There it is in silver on the underside of the sole plate. Whereas you can see the sole plate springs back into shape very aggressively, so it still has plenty of that responsive feel to it. Does it genuinely feel any more flexible than the original Alpha? In my opinion, no, and I can't say that I had any issues with how stiff the original Alpha 1 was either. It's one of those changes that at the end of the day, if they didn't tell you it was there, you probably wouldn't notice. So unless you had a huge issue with the stiffness of the forefoot on the original Alpha, you're probably not going to care about this change or notice this change whatsoever. And if you did have an issue, I'm not sure that they've changed it enough to make for any tangible difference in terms of improving your experience. As for the FG stud pattern, they have kept things relatively simple compared to what we see from a lot of speed boots these days, where you have 4 studs along either side of the forefoot, a support stud right there in the middle, and then 4 studs under the heel, all in this triangular shape. So in a lot of ways, it's not dissimilar to, let's say, what Adidas has on offer from the F50, and I guess to a lesser extent, the Predator series, especially with those triangular studs, but these are a little bit narrower in profile, and there's just more of them, where they dig into the ground a little more aggressively and just provide more bite than what I think something like an F50 might provide. So in general, when it comes to traction in the speed boot category, there's more aggressive stud patterns out there for sure. But in terms of getting the job done and just generally feeling fast in terms of providing the grip that you need when you need it, I really like this layout. And the sole plate stud pattern combo as a whole, I think is again, just really underrated in the speed boot category. And then there's the weight, where of course these are top-end speed boots, $320 top-end speed boots at that, so the expectation should be that they're pretty light, but are they any lighter than the original Alpha that they replace? Both in the same size, 9.5 US. We're gonna find out in real time using this scale, starting with the original Alpha, where you can see that they weigh in at a very lightweight 6.95 ounces, the equivalent of 197 grams. Remember those numbers, and we'll throw on the Alpha 2s, and you can see that they weigh in at 7 ounces exactly, the equivalent of 198 grams. One extra layer to the upper, 1 extra gram of overall weight. Whether it's the Alpha 2 or the Alpha 1, you're not going to notice a weight difference, and as a whole, they are very lightweight football boots. On feet is really where you're going to feel the biggest difference coming from the original Alpha, where yes, can you make the suggestion that this upper isn't quite as pliable as the original? Yes, absolutely. But I think to suggest that these are so much less comfortable than the original Alpha that it's a downgrade is a stretch to say the least. This, from a comfort perspective, is as comfortable, or more so, I would argue, than just about every other speed boot on the market right now, both from a pliability of upper perspective, but also when it comes to shaping and overall fit, which has not changed whatsoever coming from the original Alpha, and I think something Mizuno have absolutely nailed, considering that this isn't their usual super soft kangaroo leather. This synthetic upper wraps your foot so nicely, and now with that grippy liner throughout the entirety of the underside of the upper, it gives you this connected sensation to the boots that I honestly can't say that you get from any other product currently available. It is a truly unique sensation, and one that, again, considering how different it is, feels incredibly comfortable. The nice deep central lacing system allows for adjustability unlike any other football boot in the speed boot category, which I really appreciate. And again, the lockdown is just second to none. The upper has great structure to it. Your heel is firmly secure in place. The grip on the insole helps to hold your foot in place as well. And that Carvo insert is noticeably responsive in the forefoot compared to pretty much any football boot on the market right now. The only thing that maybe has a slightly stiffer feel, I guess I shouldn't say slightly, it's a lot stiffer, would be the Ultra 5 Carbon, but that's a speed boot going in a completely different direction altogether. When it comes to overall width, because of the more traditional design with that U-throat construction, this boot has the ability to open up quite a bit, but then also be able to close down once you tie the laces tight, where the base shape of this boot just has really nice width pretty much all the way through, but they've also absolutely nailed the volume, where they fit super snug when you tie the laces tight, but they don't necessarily feel like they are restrictive or squeezing your feet in any way at all. I also really appreciate that they have a decent amount of width through the forefoot and toe box area, meaning that they're not necessarily jamming your toes all together like some super pointy speed boots can often do. And then when it comes to sizing, that also hasn't really changed from the original Alpha, where I would say they run about a quarter size long. I'm wearing these in my usual size 9.5 US, and I have a smidge of extra space at the tip of my toe that I typically would not have. It's not enough for me to personally go down half a size, but it is something to be aware of, where if your boots are currently a little bit too big, going half a size down might not be a bad idea, but for people that are already wearing their boots pretty snug with no extra space, you should be fine going true to size. So in conclusion, there is no doubt that the Mizuno Alpha 2 Japan is a fantastic pair of speed boots, and depending on personal preference, they might just be the very best ones currently on the market. Is it better than the original in the sense that if you were playing in the Alpha 2 versus the Alpha 1, you would be performing at a higher level? Absolutely not, but that's the case with pretty much any new model comparing it to the old one. But what I will say is, from a technical standpoint, the incremental improvements that they've made are pretty undeniable. Would I argue that the Alpha 1 is maybe a slightly more comfortable football boot? Yes, I would. But would I also argue that the Alpha 2 is uncomfortable? Absolutely not. In fact, very far from it. From a technical standpoint, they've made the upper a little bit stiffer, but because of that grip liner through the entirety of the inside of the football boot, the lockdown, the responsiveness, and the objective performance characteristics that you can legitimately feel do come across as an improvement over the original. And once you get used to the boots after 10 minutes of wear, that little bit of loss of comfort, I think, pretty much completely negates itself and becomes a non-factor. So in typical Mizuno fashion, the new model is just incrementally better than what we had from the old one. Does that mean you need to run out and buy them? Absolutely not. But from a technical standpoint, this is one of the most technically impressive feeling and performing football boots currently on the market. And if you have the money to spend, they're pretty awesome football boots.